Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The rain hadn't started falling that afternoon, but the clouds above Uzuyama town carried the kind of weight that made everyone walk faster, sweep slower, and think longer. Ibube sat on the worn cement bench at the side of Sarah's house, peeling roasted groundnuts with more care than usual, his long fingers moving like a tailor threading a delicate hem. Sarah's voice rang out from the kitchen window, calling out to Junior to hurry with the cooler of jollof rice for the upcoming weight keep. The air smelled like dust rising slowly, like something in the atmosphere had changed, and no one had the courage to say it aloud. Inside the living room, Ada reclined on the threadbare couch with her head tilted back, laughing at a meme on Junior's phone. They were all gathered that weekend for the burial of their late cousin, Tocci, who had died in a motor accident barely a week after his traditional marriage. The siblings hadn't all been under one roof in months, so the jokes had flown freely, as if laughter was the only umbrella big enough to shield them from life's harder truths. Somewhere between the cups of malt, scattered bones of roasted fish, and loud teasing, a joke flew out. Sarah had laughed and said, "Make gonna do DNA test first, because a Bogna resemble anybody for this family." The room had burst into noise like a kettle left too long on fire, everyone talking at once, pointing, laughing, clapping. Junior chimed in next, pretending to be a doctor holding test tubes. "Let's check. I go collect samples now. It was all banter at first, that kind of laughter that doesn't touch the soul, only dances on the surface like bubbles on boiling beans. But in that laughter, something stuck its claws into Abube's mind. He didn't laugh as much. And when Sarah said she could actually get DNA kits cheap from her clinic, the room went quiet for a second too long before exploding again. Yet that silence, bare and brief, spoke louder than any joke they told that day. By Monday morning, the jokes had followed them into a group chat titled Papa's Delegates, a name they had coined in jest because Papa Solomon always referred to them that way. He was fond of boasting to his friends, "These, my children, are my delegates to the world." No shaking. His voice still rang in their heads, even now that arthritis had carved its own name into his knees and his eyes squinted more than they used to. Sarah, ever the spirited one, posted that she had ordered 4 at-home DNA kits and would deliver them once everyone confirmed. She added a line with a laughing emoji, "Make we shock ourselves small." Ibube hesitated before responding with a thumbs up. His heart, however, had already begun to whisper suspicions he didn't know he carried. Maybe it was the way Mama Cecilia always favored Junior subtly, or how Sarah's skin tone seemed to shine too bright against Papa's charcoal complexion. He remembered once, when he was about 17, hearing Mama Cecilia sobbing behind the bathroom curtain. She'd muffled it with a wrapper, but even silence has a voice if you've lived in the same house for years. But those memories had always been buried, folded like clothes that didn't fit anymore, stashed at the bottom of a mental wardrobe. Now they floated to the surface like dry leaves in harmattan wind. When the kits arrived that Friday, Sarah distributed them with the same excitement she once had when they got their first video game console. Everyone laughed. No one said what they were truly thinking. They followed instructions like school children: cheek swab, dry for 10 minutes, seal, label. Ada giggled nervously through hers. Junior made fun of Ibube, asking if his beard would interfere with the sample. In truth, Ibube had never felt more naked. The air in the room was light with jokes, but heavy with the quiet thud of hearts pretending not to beat faster. 2 weeks later, the courier dropped the envelope at Sarah's clinic. She didn't open it. She placed it in her bag as if it were just another lab report, but her fingers twitched the entire ride home. That evening, she called a siblings-only meeting in her apartment. The sun was sliding into the earth like someone trying to sneak away from a party they never wanted to attend in the first place. Ibube arrived first, followed by Ada, then Junior, who brought pastries to lighten the mood. Sarah locked the door behind them, her mouth set like wet cement. They sat, heartbeats pacing like soldiers before war. When she finally opened the envelope, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of unraveling something they couldn't stitch back once torn. 4 names, 4 results. Junior, biological child of Solomon and Cecilia. Ada, Cecilia and unidentified male. Sarah, Cecilia and same unidentified male. Eboob, Cecilia and another male entirely. The room turned to glass, fragile and transparent. No one said a word for 5 full minutes. Ada sank into the couch like someone had unplugged her. Sarah kept rubbing her knees. Junior, the youngest, looked lost. Eboob stared at the result, his lips parting, but no sound followed. He thought of his father, Papa Solomon, who had spent nights repairing neighbors' roofing sheets just to buy Ada's jam form. The same man who, even in his 60s, still ironed his children's old-school uniforms to give to the less privileged. How could so much love come from a man who'd lived unknowingly in the shadow of betrayal? They decided that night not to tell Papa Solomon. Not now. Not ever, maybe. He was 60, his body slower, but his heart still beating for his children like a drum of hope. The truth, if spilled carelessly, could crush him like a snail under a careless foot. Yet each of them carried the weight differently. Ada kept asking questions no one could answer. How many lies did she tell? Was it all of us except Junior? Sarah said little. Junior, though spared biologically, felt emotionally entangled in a knot none of them could undo. But it was Eboob who bore the brunt silently. He walked back home with hands clenched in his pockets and a head full of ghosts. His mother's laugh echoed in his ears years ago when he won a debate competition and she danced barefoot around the living room, claiming credit for his vocabulary. Was that love or guilt? He remembered Papa waking him at dawn to help mix cement, saying, "This is how men are made." Eboob had carried that pride like a badge. Now, it felt like borrowed feathers on a bird that never flew straight. As he reached the family compound, he saw Papa Solomon struggling with the padlock on the gate. The man looked up, smiled broadly, and said, "My Eboob, my first fruit." And in that moment, Eboob felt something break, not in anger, but in sorrow so sharp it sliced clean through him like cold steel. The man he wasn't blood to had raised him like royalty. And the woman whose blood flowed in his veins had wrapped them all in a lie stitched too tightly to undo. The following days moved like a leaking tap, slow, persistent, and maddening in their rhythm. Nothing outward had changed in the family, but everything inward had begun to rot at the edges. Eboob found himself waking before dawn, staring at the ceiling as cockcrow echoed faintly from a neighbor's poultry. Sleep eluded him like a slippery fish in a muddy stream. In the compound, Mama Cecilia moved about as she always had, watering her bitter leaf plants, shouting greetings to passers-by, and occasionally humming the gospel tunes she liked to wash clothes to. But now, her laughter sounded like a song out of key, her steps too calculated, as if she feared stepping on a landmine hidden beneath her own front yard. Sarah, who had always been quick with comebacks, now chose silence more often. Ada hardly came around. She would send messages in their group chat, but left them unread when others replied. Junior, the only one who could still look Papa in the eye without guilt bleeding through, tried to distract the rest with YouTube comedy clips and voice notes filled with jokes, but they rang hollow. The siblings carried their silence like a second skin, itchy and uncomfortable, but too painful to peel off. Inside each of them, a private war had begun between memory and truth, between love and bitterness. Eboob, more than the others, found himself questioning everything. Every hug, every "I'm proud of you," every prayer his mother ever said aloud. The world he had known felt like sand in the mouth, dry, tasteless, and not meant to be swallowed. One Thursday afternoon, when the sun hung low and gold over the rooftops like a giant bowl of hot oil, Sarah called for another meeting. Not a formal one, just a casual sit-down. she'd said. But the moment Ada walked in with her face set like a locked door, and Junior showed up without his usual cheerful swagger, everyone knew it was more than a chat. The living room curtain fluttered with a faint breeze, and the standing fan clicked with its head tilted as if curious about what would be said. Sarah brought out a plain brown envelope and placed it in the center of the table, unopened. "I requested further testing," she began, her voice steady but her hands clutched tightly between her thighs. "More advanced sequencing. I wanted to be sure. I don't know, maybe it was an error. But no, it wasn't." Her words hovered over them like dust in sunlight. Ebube's father wasn't even the same as mine and Ada's. She said it as gently as someone could drop a bomb. Ada flinched. Junior stared at his fingers. Ebube nodded slowly, like a man counting heartbeats instead of numbers. "So, 3 different men?" Ada asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah looked away. "No. Admite ai barmani rende ne no ferestari mento pateres o mero patanada. You fed in middle mom and rare verb that outsonter are beyond them better than in nine per merenali. You men and bite them been only a penetration and instead. Board the meal fork with a safety over the ethos fork and with a buried and butter for that upon that put a meal with him in a tarp. Well, meal no part when they have been in a point to me about a perimeter and been meat or day. Or have they have your Bible in the mere hills or your water female will serve some fair careers and Marianne me was say. For some people me one for me and you. One for a boob. None of them. Papa. The truth tasted bitter, like biting into an unripe fruit you mistook for sweet. They sat in silence again. But it wasn't like the silence from before. It had matured into something darker, more complicated, like overripe mangoes fallen to the earth and ignored. And just like that, another layer of their mother's lie peeled itself open, showing wounds that hadn't even begun to form scabs. They decided to confront her, not with shouting or insults. They weren't raised like that, but with clarity. Questions, cold facts, the type of silence you bring to a court, not a kitchen. It was Sarah who led the charge. They waited until Sunday afternoon when Papa had gone to visit an old friend in the next village. Cecilia was in the backyard peeling yam, her scarf tied tight around her head, sweat glistening on her neck like morning dew on a guava leaf. When they surrounded her quietly, she looked up and knew something was off. Her eyes scanned them one by one. "What is it?" she asked, already knowing, as if the truth had been ringing in her ears long before the first test was ever done. Sarah didn't waste time. She brought out the papers. She didn't wave them or raise her voice. She just said, "We know." Mama Cecilia's eyes widened, then softened. The knife fell from her hand and landed beside the yam. Her shoulders sagged like someone had pulled out her spine. And then, without a word, she sat on the nearest stool and began to cry, not wail, not shout, just a deep, guttural sob that made a boob look away. "He's dead," she said between sobs. "Patrick, your real father. He died shortly after I married Solomon. I didn't plan it. I swear. I was young. I was scared. I thought it would end with just one mistake, but it kept happening." No one interrupted. "Solomon was so good, too good, and I was a coward." Her voice cracked. "Eilit." And the lie became life. For a long time, no one said anything. There was nothing to say. Forgiveness was not a fruit anyone could pluck in that moment. What they felt was betrayal, thick and heavy like smoke from wet firewood. As they left the backyard, none of them turned back. Ada wiped her face with the hem of her blouse. Sarah looked like she had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. Junior walked ahead, his shoulders tense, not from anger, but confusion. And Ebube, he walked last, dragging his slippers against the dusty path like a man whose legs had forgotten how to move with purpose. Back inside, Papa's laughter drifted through the front gate as he returned with a friend, completely unaware that the house he was walking into now carried the echo of secrets too heavy to float. He greeted his children warmly, unaware that behind each smile was a knot too tight to untie. Later that evening, Ibub watched his father serve tea with shaking hands and thought, how do you tell a man who gave you everything that nothing was his to begin with? The question coiled in his chest like a snake without rest. That night, sleep evaded all of them. Ada lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning its own circles of confusion. Sarah lit a candle and prayed without words. Junior scrolled through old family photos until dawn, and Ibub sat outside under the orange tree, eyes fixed on the moon, wondering if it had ever watched a man live a lie so lovingly, so purely that even the truth dared not touch him. The days that followed the confrontation with Mama Cecilia were marked by a strange quiet, the kind that settles over a place not because there's peace, but because there are too many words trapped inside people's throats. Even the birds around their compound seemed to chirp with caution, as though they, too, sensed the weight hanging in the air, like a soaked bedsheet refusing to dry. Sarah stopped coming to the family house altogether. Ada would still show up occasionally, but only when she knew Papa Solomon wouldn't be around. Junior remained the only bridge, trying to keep things from completely collapsing, even though he had started to feel like a thread trying to hold four sides of a torn wrapper together. Ibub, who once moved around the house with a sort of dignified calm, now walked like a man weighed down by a name that no longer belonged to him. His silence wasn't loud, it was buried deep, like a fault line waiting to crack. Each morning, Papa would call out his name with that same joy that used to make the compound feel like home. Ibub, my lion, you go follow me repair that cupboard today? And every time, Ibub answered with a smile so rehearsed, it felt like a performance he didn't audition for. Papa still had no idea that the son he had once danced with under the mango tree during his graduation was never, in the biological sense, his own. That truth, like a snake under dry leaves, remained hidden, dangerous, quiet, and breathing. One morning, while sweeping the compound, Ada found herself staring at the old family portrait nailed to the sitting room wall, one taken 15 years ago when they were all still teenagers, and Mama Cecilia's smile had no guilt hanging beneath it. In the photo, Papa stood proudly in the center, flanked by the four children like a tree surrounded by young, healthy branches. Ibub had his hand on Papa's shoulder, and Sarah was laughing at something outside the camera's frame. It was the kind of picture people pointed to with pride. But now, as Ada stared at it, all she could think of was how well Mama had orchestrated a lie that danced right under their noses for decades. She remembered how Mama used to say, a good lie wears fine cloth and greets elders, whenever someone was caught red-handed with a childish fib. Back then, it sounded like wisdom. Now, it felt like a curse that had lived too long in their bones. Ada reached up and turned the photo slightly crooked on the wall. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough to remind herself that nothing in their family was straight anymore. That same afternoon, Mama Cecilia came into the room, holding a basket of vegetables, and paused when she saw the tilted frame. Her eyes locked with Ada's, and for a brief second, neither woman said a word. The silence between them was thick, like ogbono soup left too long on the fire. Then Mama looked away and walked to the kitchen. That evening, Ada didn't stay for dinner. She left with her head high, but her chest carried the same heaviness she thought she had emptied the day they confronted their mother. Papa Solomon remained oblivious to the emotional volcano erupting beneath his roof. His world still turned on the axis of hard work, evening prayers, and short visits to his carpenter friend, Mr. Agbo, who lived across the river. His routine was predictable, like the morning crow of the neighbor's cock, comforting in its constancy. He would wake before the sun, boil water with the small kerosene stove in the corner of the kitchen, and shout instructions with a voice that had raised four children into adulthood. And they, his children, though now carrying a different truth, still responded out of habit, love, and something that resembled duty. One particular evening, after a long day of helping Mr. Agbo construct a double-decker bed for a new client, Papa came home limping slightly. His knee, which had begun troubling him during the last harmattan, was acting up again. He called Iboob to bring balm, and sat down on the veranda with a tired smile. "Old age no day use break," he chuckled. Iboob came with the balm, but avoided looking directly at him. Instead, he rubbed Papa's knee with gentle care, like a man apologizing through his hands. Papa winced, then patted Iboob's back. "That man chop lion heart," he said, unaware that each word was driving a deeper wedge into Iboob's conscience. Later that night, as Papa snored softly in his room, Iboob sat alone outside, staring at the stars. They looked the same, distant, silent, unreachable. And for the first time in years, he felt like a stranger in his own home. Not because of what he knew, but because of what he could never say. The pressure inside the house eventually began to find small ways to leak out, like cracked walls letting in rain. Mama Cecilia tried once or twice to reach out. She made Ada's favorite yam porridge and left it in the fridge with a sticky note, "Eat small. It's fresh." She sent Sarah a voice note praying for her exams, even though she knew Sarah had finished school a year ago. She offered Junior new wrappers to send to his girlfriend abroad, but each effort felt like a drop of water on a forest fire. Too late, too little, too empty. Sarah ignored the voice note. Ada didn't mention the porridge. Junior thanked her, but never sent the wrappers. Mama Cecilia's steps became slower, her eyes duller. It wasn't old age, it was regret, aging her from the inside out. One day, Iboob came home early and found her kneeling beside her bed, muttering prayers that cracked between sobs. She didn't notice him standing by the door, watching her, and he didn't move. He stood there, eyes dry but heart pounding, trying to understand how the woman who had once nursed his fever with palm wine and soaked towels could also be the architect of the secret that had broken them. That night he didn't eat. He didn't talk. He lay in bed and kept hearing her words from the backyard. The lie became life. Over and over, like a broken radio stuck on a single phrase. And in that quiet ache, a seed of anger began to grow in him, slow, steady, and without warning. The day began like any other, sunlight seeping lazily through the thin curtains in Papa Solomon's bedroom, the clang of his old kettle on the kerosene stove, and the unmistakable smell of dust rising from the compound floor after a morning sweep. But inside the house, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The air was too still, as if holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable. Sarah stood by the window in her apartment, watching passers-by stroll with buckets and nylon bags, but her thoughts were far away. Her phone buzzed on the table. Ada had sent a message. "I saw Mama crying again." Sarah didn't reply. Instead, she returned to the couch where she'd spent most of her weekends sorting through old journals. In one of them, she found a birthday card from Papa dated 10 years ago. The words inside were written in his careful script. "I don't need a DNA to know you're mine. I see myself in how you fight for everything you love." Sarah read it again and again until the letters blurred into clouds. It was unbearable. This secret they all carried had begun to reshape their memories. What used to be cherished recollections now felt like scenes from a film they were no longer part of. Even moments of joy, like Papa teaching them to ride bicycles or lifting Junior to touch the ceiling fan, had become tainted by a question mark that refused to leave. She tucked the card back into the journal and exhaled slowly, her chest tight. Some truths don't shout. They whisper over time until you can't hear anything else. That same afternoon, Papa Solomon decided to fix the broken fence at the back of the compound, a task he had postponed for weeks due to his aching knees. Junior offered to help, but Papa waved him off. "This one no heavy," he said, already limping toward the tool shed. He whistled as he moved, the sound familiar and comforting, like the gentle rhythm of rain on an iron roof. From the kitchen window, Mama Cecilia watched him quietly. Her hands were submerged in soapy water, but her heart had gone cold. There was a heaviness in her bones that no amount of rest could shake. She hadn't slept properly in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her children walking away from her, not angrily, but slowly, like people leaving a house that was no longer safe. Outside, Papa placed a rusted chair beside the wall and climbed it to reach the top of the fence, hammer in hand. The chair wobbled slightly. He adjusted his weight and kept working, sweat soaking through the back of his shirt. Just as he lifted the last plank of wood, his knee buckled. The hammer slipped, and his body followed. The sound of his fall was not loud, but it was sharp, like a calabash breaking in a quiet shrine. Mama screamed from the kitchen. The chair clattered to the ground. By the time Junior reached him, Papa was lying on his side, gripping his chest and whispering, "Now my leg done twist." His face was pale, his breath short. Ibube ran in barefoot, carrying the car keys, his voice shaking. "Help me lift Am, gently. Make we go hospital now." The drive to the hospital was blur and panic stitched into a single, breathless moment. Papa sat in the back seat with his legs stretched awkwardly, his face grimacing with every bump on the road. Mama sat beside him, muttering prayers under her breath, her hands shaking so much they spilled the sachet water she tried to pour on his forehead. Ibube drove like a man being chased by time, overtaking slow-moving buses and dodging potholes like a man whose entire life was hanging by a thread. At the hospital, nurses rushed him into the emergency room while forms were being filled. The doctor on call was an old classmate of Sarah's, and she had arrived already, having received a call from Junior mid-drive. After x-rays and examinations, the doctor confirmed it was a fracture, a complicated one. But that wasn't the scariest part. The real problem, he said, was that Papa's blood pressure had spiked to a dangerous level during the fall. His heart was strained, his body not as strong as it once was. They admitted him immediately. That night, as he lay on the hospital bed with tubes and machines connected to his chest, the room felt cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the sheer terror that filled the silence. Mama sat beside him with her wrapper tied loose, eyes red, lips trembling. Junior stood by the wall, arms crossed like he was holding himself together. Sarah leaned against the door, trying not to cry. Ibube didn't speak. He just watched the rise and fall of Papa's chest, wondering if the man he had called father for 32 years would wake up the next morning, still believing in a family that had deceived him. The doctor came in the next morning with a clipboard in hand, nodding slightly. Papa was stable, but weak. He needs to avoid stress, emotional or physical. It's very important, the doctor said, looking each of them in the eye. They nodded solemnly. Later that day, Papa woke up with a weak smile, asking for porridge and teasing the nurse, who took his blood pressure. "No be small thing-o," he chuckled. "One leg done disgrace me." The children laughed, soft, nervous laughter, the kind that comes when relief and guilt wrestle in the heart. But that laughter faded quickly when he turned to Junior and said, "Make Una no worry. I go still day dance for Una wedding." His voice cracked on the last word. Mama Cecilia squeezed his hand tightly, her face twitching as if trying to hold in tears. That night, as they took turns sitting beside him, a new fear settled over them, not of death, but of truth. If one fall could nearly snatch Papa from them, what would the truth do? Ibube stayed with him longer than the others. At midnight, Papa woke briefly and whispered, "You be good son, Ibube. Even when you no talk, I dey hear you." And just like that, Ibube turned his face away so Papa wouldn't see the single tear rolling down his cheek. Some men bleed from places no one can see. And in that room, with beeping machines and prayers whispered into the air, he realized there were two kinds of pain in this world. The pain you tell people about, and the one you carry so quietly, even God has to lean close to notice. The house felt different when Papa returned from the hospital, slower, quieter, like something sacred had passed through and left behind a lingering reverence. He now moved with a cane, each step deliberate, as if testing whether the earth beneath him still had the strength to carry his weight. The doctor had instructed complete rest, and Junior had turned Papa's old study room into a makeshift bedroom, so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Mama Cecilia hovered around him more than necessary, fluffing his pillows, adjusting his wrapper, offering tea he never asked for. The others, Ebu, Sarah, and Ada, rotated shifts to help out, but beneath the gestures lay something too big for duty and too painful for words. Ebu, especially, felt like a glass window, clear on the surface, but cracking slowly from inside. Watching his father wince from a simple stretch brought with it a guilt so sharp he had to excuse himself from the room more times than he wanted to admit. Papa remained himself, telling jokes, watching evening news, even singing old war songs he claimed he learned from his grandfather, but there was something quieter about him now, like a man who had seen the end of a storm and knew it might return without warning. And through it all, the secret remained locked inside the hearts of his children, growing heavier by the day. It wasn't just what they knew, it was what they now saw through different eyes. Every act of kindness from Papa, every fond word, now felt like a thread being pulled through fabric already worn thin. Ada, who once prided herself on being the firebrand of the family, now moved like someone unsure whether the next step would hold. One Sunday afternoon, she and Sarah sat under the orange tree where Papa used to hold morning prayers. The tree still bore fruit, but the fruits weren't as sweet anymore. Ada plucked one and bit into it, then spat it out quickly. "Sour," she muttered, tossing it away. Sarah watched her, then reached for her hand. "You haven't told Chinidu, have you?" she asked, referring to Ada's fiancé. Ada shook her head. "How do I explain this?" she replied, her voice shaky. "That the man I call father is not my father? That my mother wore a wedding ring while carrying another man's child? How do you say that without sounding like a ticking time bomb?" Sarah didn't answer. She simply leaned back against the tree trunk, staring at the blue sky that stretched like an unanswered question. In that moment, both of them realized how deeply their lives had been shaped by a man who had no idea how much of himself he'd poured into what was never biologically his. Yet, despite everything, none of them had the heart to shatter the illusion that held their father upright. They loved him, maybe now more than ever. But love, they'd come to understand, could be the heaviest silence of all. And even when it screamed inside you, you kept your lips shut, because sometimes the truth wasn't brave, it was cruel. Junior, whose world had been the least shaken by the DNA results, found himself caught in a peculiar kind of limbo. He was the only child who belonged fully to both parents, but instead of feeling secure, he felt displaced. The others were drifting like canoes without paddles, their emotional compasses broken, yet they still shared a bond he couldn't quite touch. He began to question his own place within the family. Was he now the anchor or just the reminder of everything they were not? One evening, while helping Papa warm water for his bath, he asked a question he had been chewing on for days. "Papa, if any of us turned out not to be your blood, what would you do?" The question fell like a stone into a still pond. Papa didn't answer immediately. He stirred the water in the basin with a plastic cup, his eyes focused on the steam rising from it. Then he looked at Junior, a smile pulling gently at his lips. "You know weddin' I love past for this family," he said. "Na say none of una ever make me feel like I day alone. My blood or not, if na me way carry una from the beginning till now, then na me be una father. Blood day betray. Love no day lie." Junior didn't respond. He nodded, throat tight, then excused himself to get the towel. But the words stuck to his ribs like pounded yam, heavy, filling, unforgettable. That night, he texted the group chat, "Papa knows." Maybe not the whole story, but he knows something. Sarah read that text long after everyone else had dropped a reaction emoji. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she got up, walked to her drawer, and brought out the letters she'd been writing for weeks. Letters addressed to Papa, full of everything she couldn't say. One started with, "I'm sorry we're not who you think we are." Another ended with, "You gave us more than the man who made us ever could." She had never planned to send them. But that night, after Junior's message, she placed one inside Papa's old Bible, the one he always left open to Psalm 127, on the nightstand. Then she stood by his door for a few minutes, her shadow spilling across the hallway. She didn't knock. She didn't enter. She just listened to his gentle snore and whispered, "We're trying, Papa. We're really trying." The next morning she returned to find the Bible still open, but the letter gone. Papa didn't mention it. But during breakfast he held her hand longer than usual as he prayed, asking God for understanding deeper than flesh, and mercy larger than any wound. When she opened her eyes, tears clung to her lashes like reluctant visitors. And in that prayer, she found something that felt like grace, even if it didn't fix anything. The weeks that followed brought with them a kind of quiet that didn't ask to be explained. It simply existed, like the way dry season crept in without warning and changed everything without making a sound. Papa Solomon's recovery was slow, but he was improving. The cane became a part of him, like a final punctuation mark on a sentence that had taken decades to complete. He no longer did much of the housework, but he remained the center around which the family's world spun. On a warm Wednesday morning, he called all 4 children to sit with him under the mango tree, a place that had once held laughter, prayers, and the rhythm of his voice singing praise choruses at dawn. They came, each carrying something unspoken. Sarah brought a flask of pop and akara. Ada carried a small pillow for his back. Junior brought the foldable plastic stool Papa liked, and Ebub, as always, brought himself last, silent, steady, torn. When they had all settled, Papa leaned forward slowly, rubbed his knee, and said, "I've been watching Una." The sentence, though soft, landed like a stone on still water. Something changed. "I no fit put my finger on am, but I see it. The way Una dey look each other. The way Una dey walk around this house like say Una dey tiptoe on hot sand." He paused, took a sip of water, then smiled. "If Una want talk, talk. But if the thing too heavy, then just know say my heart get space. Big space." They didn't speak, but they didn't look away either. That was the day they knew that Papa hadn't needed a DNA test to read the silence they carried. He might not have known the details, but he had read the sorrow in their steps, the guilt in their hands, and the ache they tried to hide behind smiles that never reached their eyes. Mama Cecilia, who had kept her distance from that conversation, stood behind the kitchen curtain listening, her back pressed against the wall, her hands gripping her apron like she was wringing out water from cloth that refused to dry. She wanted to walk into that moment, say something, anything, but her feet wouldn't obey. Over the past few weeks, the house she built with her lies had begun to feel like a prison. The walls whispered when no one spoke. The floor creaked like it carried stories only she could understand. At night, she would sit on the edge of the bed and watch Papa sleep, wondering if his dreams ever betrayed the reality she had hidden from him. Sometimes he would mutter in his sleep, phrases like, "My children, my Cecilia, God no go shame us," and each time her chest tightened, as though those words were knives wrapped in velvet. The children no longer looked at her the same. Ada barely stayed long enough to finish a meal. Sarah greeted but never lingered. Junior, though polite, had stopped asking her questions about his childhood, as though afraid of what answers might fall out of her mouth. And Ebub, her Ebub, moved around her like a shadow that had lost its source of light. She began to lose weight, not from sickness, but from sorrow. Food no longer tasted like food. Sleep felt like punishment. One morning, she sat by the window and began writing letters to each of them. Not to defend herself, not to beg, just to explain, because even the truth, no matter how late it arrives, still deserves its day in the sun. She folded each note carefully, marked it with their names, and placed them beneath the pillows in their old rooms. It was on a Saturday afternoon, when the sun sat lazily above the rooftops, and the scent of fried stew drifted from Mama's pot, that the house felt a ripple of peace for the first time in months. Papa had fallen asleep on the couch, his snore soft and rhythmic. Junior was in the backyard trimming the overgrown grass, humming a gospel tune. Sarah was braiding Ada's hair under the veranda, their conversation light, unforced. Ibu stood by the gate, watching the street as two boys chased a tire down the dusty road, their laughter cutting through the air like freedom. Then, almost by chance, he turned and saw Mama watching him from the doorway. Their eyes met, not in anger, not even in disappointment, but in a kind of painful acknowledgement. She stepped forward slowly and said, "I wrote you something. It's under your pillow." He didn't respond. But later that night, he went upstairs, shut the door, and sat on the bed for a long time before unfolding the letter. It was short, just 7 sentences. In the last line, she wrote, "I didn't give you Solomon's blood, but I gave you his love, because I watched how he carried you like you were born to him, and I envied it every day." When he finished reading, he sat still for a long time, letting the weight of those words settle like dust on old furniture. Then he folded the paper carefully, placed it in the drawer, and lay back, staring at the ceiling, where a faint crack curved like a question mark. By the time Harmattan rolled in again, the family had learned how to live with the fracture that would never quite heal. They never told Papa the truth, not because they were cowards, but because they had learned that not all truths deserve an audience, especially when the one who would suffer the most had done nothing to earn the pain. The silence became a shared language among the siblings, a kind of quiet loyalty they vowed never to break. Mama remained in the background, present, but softer, always carrying the air of a woman who had made peace with being partly forgiven. Sarah went back to her clinic. Ada eventually married Chinedu in a modest wedding that Papa danced through with joy, and Junior traveled abroad for his postgraduate studies, calling often with videos of his small apartment and his excitement over winter. Ibu stayed behind, partly to care for Papa, partly because something in him needed more time to breathe. One evening, while helping Papa trim his nails on the veranda, the old man smiled and said, "You know, say, when I day your age, I get fear way no get name?" Ibu looked up. "Which kind fear?" Papa chuckled. "Say the people I day live for go find out, say I no get anything but love to give." He paused, then added, "But nah the only thing way I get. And somehow, it still carry us reach here." That night, after Papa had gone to bed, Ibu stepped outside, looked up at the stars, and whispered a prayer, not for answers, not for vengeance, but for strength. Because sometimes carrying a secret is the only way to protect the kind of love that built you. And though it burns, you carry it anyway. Sometimes the deepest pain comes not from enemies, but from the ones we once called home. In life, we don't always get the truth wrapped in honesty or the love we receive tied to blood. Some people give us their whole heart without sharing our DNA, while others give us their DNA but never show up with their heart. In such moments, it is not our anger that defines us, but our restraint. Silence, when it protects love, is not weakness. It is wisdom seasoned with grace. If you ever find yourself carrying a truth that could shatter someone who gave you everything, ask yourself, is this truth a bridge, or is it a sword? Not all wounds deserve to be reopened just to prove that they bled. Sometimes, peace is choosing to guard the heart of another, even while your own aches in secret. To the fathers and mothers who love children they did not birth, you are proof that parenting is not just a matter of biology, but of sacrifice, heart, and presence. To the children who discover painful truths and still choose not to destroy those who built them, you are living testimonies of strength the world does not always celebrate, but heaven surely does. There's no manual for handling betrayal, no blueprint for what to do when the ground under your name starts to shift. But remember this, no lie can bury the truth of a good heart, and no mistake can erase the power of consistent love. If you've been betrayed, take your time. Grieve. Heal. But don't let your heart turn to stone. And if you are the one who betrayed others, seek forgiveness, not with perfect words, but with a repentant heart and a willingness to live differently from here on out. Forgiveness doesn't always mean things will return to how they were, but it does mean that pain will not have the final word. Let love lead, even when the road is narrow. Let wisdom speak louder than your emotions. And above all, don't forget, some secrets are kept not out of fear, but out of fierce, protective love. Heavenly Father, thank you for love that shows up even when truth fails. Thank you for fathers like Papa Solomon, who love not by blood, but by sacrifice, endurance, and presence. Lord, we bring every broken family, every hidden secret, and every weary heart before you. We ask for grace to carry what we cannot change, and wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain still. For every listener who is carrying pain in silence, wrap them in peace that passes understanding. For those who have been betrayed by someone they trusted, Lord, bind their wounds with cords of healing and restore their sense of worth. Teach us to love like you, selfless, pure, and unshaken by human flaws. Where bitterness wants to grow, plant peace. Where confusion clouds the mind, bring clarity. Where hearts are heavy with truth, too sharp to speak, give strength to endure and forgive. For every parent listening who has failed, intentionally or unintentionally, let mercy find them and let repentance not fall on deaf ears. For every child who has been wronged, teach them to carry dignity even in disappointment. Lord, give us the kind of love that doesn't just endure, but transforms. Let our homes be places of healing, not harm. Let our silences be wise, not cowardly. And above all, may our loyalty to love be stronger than our loyalty to revenge. Bless every ear that hears this story. Let the lesson not bring shame, but bring growth. Let it comfort the broken, convict the deceitful, and uplift the weary. In homes torn by secrets, let there be light. In hearts stained by betrayal, let there be cleansing. And in the lives of those who choose grace over revenge, let there be peace that settles like evening rain. We ask all these in Jesus' name. Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.